Hey, you have arrived at the process. My name is Dr. John Bush. This is a continued lesson to try to help you win your fantasy football drafts. We've made it up to lesson 30, which is uh, running backs versus wide receiver positional analysis. This is part one. Got lots of data for you. So let's get started moving through this world here. The reason I thought we should focus on running backs and wide receivers, pretty much those are going to be the uh, most players on your team are going to be from those two positions for the most part. And so I thought it's important as we go down through the draft for us to consider the uh, average of what's going on, kind of the journey, and just with all things being considered, for instance, which one's a better choice just to get, points per game for you if you have no other way to break any kind of tie at some point. So with that, the table here, I think, kind of gives us a view of this. This is fantasy points per game, and we see the position, running back, wide receiver, the grand average for each rank, and here's the rank, and this is end of season rank. First, 6th, 12th, 18, and so forth. So by sixes, just to have a sample point going down through the rounds here, right? So, I believe it can kind of give us a feel for what's going on. So, running backs are pretty much giving us less points per wide receiver by 18, rank 18. So the 18th running back is and has produced less fantasy points for our team than the 18th wide receiver on average. This is, I think it's, I forgot. Certainly it's at least 5 or 6 years of data, but it could be all 18. It's been a while since I've generated these metrics here, but I believe either way you're getting a feel for what's going on. So on average, running backs will dominate until about the 18th pick, and probably maybe even somewhere between the 12th to 18th end of season pick. If you could pick exactly correctly, right? I mean, wish we could all do that. So, on average, I think this is why running backs are favored early in the process versus wide receivers. And I think, I was actually doing the next block of material, ADPs, and you'll see that the first 12 ADPs, the dominant pick is the running back. So part of that is just common sense. They're producing more points. Okay, I understand. And again, this is knowing, end of season, right? So we're not risking the injuries and things, which is part of the zero running back concept a little bit. The idea that running backs are going to get injured more. So you're taking a higher risk trying to find, the top rated running backs at the end of the year. And that may be, on average, you need to look at your own records and see just how good are you at that process. Certainly, if you're good at it, then you will have an advantage. So there's a switch, and that pretty much, if you look from the 18th all the way to the 84th here, we are, you should favor wide receivers over running backs just for total points. Okay, just value wise. Okay, I know that there's a lot of other strategy things like in best ball and things, but just straight up, I have no nothing to break this tie. Then you break towards the wide receiver. Certainly probably the fifth or sixth, seventh running back, wide receiver. You probably should lean to the wide receiver on average, right? And across from the first to the 84th, if you sample that, the average is 11.5 versus 10.5. So you're winning, and you're primarily winning, at least 1 point or higher from the 18th pick down. And so again, that's just kind of how the lay of the land is. I mean, I understand you might think it isn't this way, but here's the data. Okay, this is at the end of the season. I understand ADP is not end of season. Okay, so, I mean, but we've got to have some framework. And we talked about frameworks, and this is another continuation of the reference class forecasting that we use. I'm not saying you should pick wide receivers after, you've got two running backs. Obviously, you're going to need bye weeks, etc. So, I mean, it's more deeper than that, but just it's important that we understand the framework of these two positions. On average, what are they producing? And I really feel that this gives you an idea of what's going on. And if you plot this, so I guess the data was from 02 to 20, so 18 years here. Running backs are plotted in green and wide receivers in red, and the average is in orange. And we see that at the 18th position, they're getting real close at the 12th position, but by the 18th here, we can see that the wide receivers are now higher than the running back, and that continues. Okay, so clearly running backs are dominant, especially first to the sixth picks of each position. But it's just good to see that and realize when the switch is occurring. So you need to plan accordingly in your journey. But everybody else knows that. So there's this tendency throughout the draft, and when we look at ADPs, that there's going to be a cycle. And there's going to be kind of a bias. I don't know if it's a cognitive bias, but after you draft 1-2 running backs, say you did running back, there's this feeling, this pressure to grab a wide receiver. And I've noticed up to the sixth pick, there's this feeling you want to be balanced. I want 3 and 3 kind of thing. So just look in your drafts and see, are you kind of skewing basically this push to balance the team? Somehow you think that being balanced is a good thing. Okay, it may work some years, it may not. So you need to think about draft balance a little bit. And I think there's some patterns and and positions are picked faster or slower during times of the draft. There's a lot of secrets out there, and I've actually got positional draft speed coming. I don't think anybody's ever looked at that before, so it's nice to be ahead of the game like that. And that's coming down the road in future lessons. Okay. And so that's, going to help you out down the road in looking at that. Okay, so I think we've nailed this to death now. And let's see what's next. So if we look at the percentage of the tops here in the each position, you can kind of do it based on the percentile of the rankings here relative to the average here. So if you look back on the previous, running backs are returning 100 or 7% above 100%, and of course to balance that out, wide receivers are 7% down. They're even by the sixth. It's closer than you think. It's only a 2% gap here, and they're exactly even. And then you start getting a divergence here of 2, 5. 2, 5, and then notice by the 24th we're talking 10% gap here, 10% gap, 4% gap, and 24% and 12% and so forth. So you can see the gapping here. And so if we plot that, running backs in blue and the gap versus wide receivers, and you see that they're the same at the 12th, and they're diverging by the 18th end of season. And the gap on average is getting, and this is just a trend line, a linear trend line, is getting bigger. So the running backs relative to the average at that rank is producing a lot more, probably by the 60th. Notice it really changes at the 60th position. So what's happening is the running backs are really losing value by the 60th running back, or by the 54th, somewhere between there. They have completely lost their value, right? So they're not worth as much. If you think of the value or the worth on average, they've really dropped down to where, 60th to 80th, 4th rankings here in that range. What is that? 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th pick. You really, the pressure is going to be skewed to the wide receiver, just because that's what the metrics are saying. People may not realize that. They just kind of have an intuitive feeling. They've seen it. They've done it. I understand that feeling, but I like the data. Okay, I don't like the feeling. Okay, no, we like the data. Okay, so I think it really, this table really knocks it out for you, and it should, and it really emphasizes that running backs are losing value, whereas wide receivers are gaining value relative to running backs. Okay, so they're becoming more valuable throughout the draft. Okay, let's move. We've had fun. So let's break it down into year sectors. It's always important to see what's happening now, right? And has things changed over 18 years? And I think that let's just look at the 18th first, rank 18th. And let's focus here. Notice that in the olden days, wide receivers did not dominate at the 18th position. Running backs did, okay, by a nice little bit. Only at the 24th position did running backs lose out. So that's interesting. Now let's go over here to the last 4 years. And we see that, in fact, that is flipped. So at the end of the 18 years, the last 4, wide receivers have come on and are producing more points than running backs. So it's not like, if you look at these numbers here, it's not like running backs were producing more or less. They really probably weren't. So there's no big difference here. So have running backs got worse? Or are there more running backs? There's more injuries? There's some questions there that not sure we'll figure out at the end here. I do note that at the 24th position that they're about equal again. So there's just certainly a transition time here. And 12 to 16, we see a clear wide receiver dominance. Same thing here. So there's been, since 07, pretty much the rank 18th running back versus wide receiver. The wide receiver has been producing more points for you. So that's good to know. I think the overall trends have holding up. There's some sectors that are a little different, but the good news, when you have a lot of points, a lot of data points, you can get a better feel for it. And if we look across at the running backs dropping down here, and in all these charts, the red trend line is running backs. And I think if you look 02 to 06, running backs were lasting longer. Okay, longer. And notice here in 07 to 11 that things were really different. And 12 to 16 really different. There was a change here from what we've seen. So I think there has been a change, and maybe running backs are lasting a little longer. So there was this kind of wide receiver dominance, and then kind of back to the way it was in 02. So are we going to be a little bit in that model? Have we kind of made a journey to that? It is clear that running backs in the top 6 are producing more. That, I think, those are skewed off to the side of the trends and are pretty much showing the difference. Now the gaps have been smaller, and notice very wide here and fairly wide there. So in some ways, the last 4 years look closer to the '02 to '06 than the previous, two sectors there. So I think I'm going to stick with the idea that running backs are losing value by the 18th, but just note that, you know, we may be coming back out of that a little bit. So I'm just going to keep my eyes on that trend. But I think we're pretty much safe to say that the dominance of running backs doesn't last so long. And certainly by the end of the draft, they've dropped down here. And I think we can certainly say that uh, as well. So just interesting to see, how the trends have. But the more extreme was in the early years. I think we can definitely say that the extreme was there. So, and this is just looking at the variation. So again, variation is how uh, uncertain the data segments are, right? So when we're drafting, you always want to be as certain as possible, but you do need to know when uncertainty is around and when you're sitting in a minefield and you don't even know it, right? So I think variation wise, if you look just from rank 1 to 84, then look across at the average uh, variation, you're going to see the trend that, and some people might think in the opposite, but we actually have a lot more variation early than late for the most part. Notice that in recent years, however, that hasn't been the case. There's been a lot more variation in running backs in later rounds. See, and so another hint that what's been going on the last 4 years is a change in the trend from the preceding, '07 to 2016. Just look at the variation. When I said that the gaps between the running back and the wide receiver were very much alike from '02 to '06 versus the last 4 years, and we find that variation is also similar. So that is intriguing to me. Whereas wide receivers, we really haven't seen anything abnormal. And wide receivers are going to have less variation. I think we can pretty much say that if you look all across the ranking, tend to be a little lower later, and that's held up. And whereas in running backs, you're just getting more variation. So the more reliable position is going to be the wide receiver. So just get that in your head. Okay, I don't know if you're thinking otherwise, but the earlier you're picking, probably the more variation, and the running backs are going to have more uncertainty to them in your picks. So if you've got limited time to research, better to research running backs than wide receivers. Put more of your time in to where there's higher uncertainty. Unless your records show, that you're really good at, you know, running backs, fine. That I wouldn't put as much effort in. If your records show that you're good at that, great, good for you. You're probably better than most then, and you're probably winning a lot more leagues. If you can beat the public in certain key sectors, and that would be one, I think you're doing well. So congratulations if that's you. If that's not you, that might mean that you're ignoring the uncertainty a little bit and kind of plowing in, kind of bull in the china shop and not really thinking about what's breakable. Where's the china, where's the plastic, right? The plastic dishes. What's going to break and what isn't. So, again, the metrics say pay more attention to running backs as far as research and picking because it's going to be more uncertain, especially early on versus later in the draft. So variation, year sector, just seeing running backs across, and you can see kind of the trends, and you can see the red is 02 to 06, and the orange way in the back here is the last 4 years. And so what I did was kind of shaded or outline the top in some of these groups here just to see what's going on. And very interesting. We've had some really extreme variation in the last 4 years later in the draft versus earlier, and that's very unusual here. Take a look at these check marks here showing extreme variation and extreme uncertainty. Not sure I can explain that. Okay, sometimes you can't yuck your way through the matrix, and say, oh yeah, I understand that. It's easy on a podcast to make all sorts of outrageous claims. But I'm telling you that I see it. I'm not sure I know what it means, but at least I know it's there, and that is something to consider. I mean, I could have some hypothesis. I'd have to figure out what's testable questions here. Just something to consider. Last 4 years, there's been it's a little strange for me as I see the data, looking at the variation and the extremes. And wide receivers, I'm sorry, this should be wide receivers. My bad. I mislabeled that. So, my bad. That is wide receivers. Okay, so extremes in the last 4 years, actually, we're seeing some. There's some extreme. It's like 02 to 6, there was some extreme points, and it looks like the last 4 years we've seen some extreme variation in some points here. So I'm not sure that's how the games are changing. Is it more physical? Are there more players, or is going more pass heavy is a trend? Is that causing some of these issues? I don't know. It is something to make note of, though. So I looked at the trend, positional variation from the last 4 years. I just wanted to focus because there's a lot of, sometimes you get lost in the weeds. I know. You're thinking, that's data to me is always lots of weeds. But you use various techniques to smooth it out and be thoughtful about it, right? just throwing your hands up. I don't like numbers, so I'm not gonna. Well, I mean, you can play like it doesn't matter, but it does. So, you know, you can pretend, you can tell yourself lots of things, but uh, you should be aware of the numbers. Okay, it's better than just intuit, your gut feeling, whatever that means. Okay, uh, it is clear in data analysis that uh, metrics are ruling the day. So, you know, if you don't keep records, it's easy to forget, and go back to the biases and all the lies we tell ourselves, and we're fooled by the randomness of the data. So the trend here for and this is, you could say, uncertainty. So the uncertainty for running backs as we go across for the last 4 years, even though it's a polynomial, is fairly tight in the distance here. If you map the low and the high, that's not much of a gap. Look at the running backs on the other hands. It's more of a roller coaster. And if you plot the low, okay, versus the high, it's about double, maybe 3 times the uncertainty. Just kind of the highs and lows of the running backs. So you should know that, and notice this skew towards the higher variation at the end. So that's very unusual, actually. We get high variation early, drops, and it's back. And that is just, we haven't seen a lot of that trend. That's very intriguing to me. So I think that's, some people say, oh, uncertainty is bad. Well, uncertainty just means that there is different outcomes. So that can mean better outcomes or worse outcomes, but the gaps are more extreme out here later in the draft, from about round 4 or 5. So in round 4 or 5 for running backs, there's some extremes out there. So if you're good at picking running backs, you might find some winners out there. I think by having a wider gap is suggesting there is more possibilities to grabbing some players later in the draft that have more potential higher outcomes versus the narrowness of the wide receivers. So yes, wide receivers are probably going to be safer, closer packed together regardless of what you pick, and they're probably more valuable on average. But this data also says the door is open for finding the value sleepers. So people always throw the word sleepers out. My argument is, based on these metrics, that the real sleepers relative to the pack would be in running backs, not with wide receivers. If that's where I have to roll the dice right now, I'm thinking that. And, that could be fueling the zero running back, because the idea is that you're packing your team with some of these later running backs that could move up. And you're thinking, well, where did they get that? Well, having uncertainty levels, having extreme uncertainty gaps, a higher gap, implies that some folks are hitting late on running backs more than wide receivers. So it's kind of like if you're picking wide receivers, you kind of got that in the bank, and you're not really getting a lot of up or down. It's kind of like riding on a roller coaster with no rolls and a lot of coast. Whereas running backs, there's a lot of steep hills, extreme uncertainty. So this could, when somebody said, "Oh, I like zero running back." Well, if you're good at picking early running backs and you're good at finding sleepers, I would say that there's nothing wrong with that draft strategy. People kind of want to declare one way or the other, and my feeling is it depends on it depends on the players of the year and the time. Depends on your draft pick. I mean, there's a lot of variables, and I think it could work under certain conditions. So I'm not against or for any kind of pattern, because sometimes the metrics are kind of supporting some of that. And right now, looking at the variation, I'm definitely thinking there's opportunities for running backs later in the draft. That's how I'm taking that data. That's my analysis right now. So, but here's the data. It's okay. I'm not making this up, or I wonder if. This is what it is what it is. This is what I'm seeing. This is how I'm reacting to it. Okay. So, age sectors. If we throw age as a variable and we ask the questions, are young running backs versus young wide receivers, what's going on? Notice that we see a flip-flop from the aggregate data. Aggregate means all the data, all the ages. Completely different. Young versus young. And younger wide receivers are taken over by 18-24th pretty much. I'm seeing that. Notice old running backs pretty much are not in the mix. It's all older wide receivers. And look at the differences here. Closer, but the older we get, the more skewed to running backs. Notice here, 27-30, that's all we had to pick. You're only waiting till the top 6, and then you're probably flipping over to wide receivers. So wide receivers are coming at you earlier than later. Look at this. Very different. Very different. Very different. Notice the trend here. Moving up a slot, moving up a slot, moving up a slot. Age is driving the value of the wide receiver versus the running back. So you need in your draft to be aware of the youth. I know, well, yeah, but would you know 24 to 26 is different than 21 to 23? You would probably think 24 is young. I would say it's still working for you, but it's not as good as the young youth in the last few years. So it's very intriguing to me. So in your draft, if you're seeing older running backs later in the draft, I'm not sure that uncertainty is working for you. Because if you look in here, look in this gap, say 36 around 4 and 5 maybe. What is that? A median of about 8. 24, 20 is about, median's about above 8. Probably closer to 8. Not very good in here. You're not seeing anything. I think maybe that if you're going to pick the younger running backs, you probably should stay towards the ones that have the top 10, top 12 potential. I'm thinking maybe the later ones, the more seasoned running backs, are more the catch later in the draft. In other words, why is a young running back being ignored by the ADP and the draft? What's going on here? I think that the ADP may be telling you a little bit more in the young running backs. So that's how I'm interpreting those metrics. 3rd, 4th, 5th round. They're extremely young running backs. I don't know if I'm not picking an older seasoned running back, or certainly a wide receiver, right? The skewing towards the wide receivers, getting older there. But I'm thinking that I'm a little concerned if a real young running back is being picked late. I think the public's telling us something. We should listen a little bit more. So I think that's how I interpret it. So I'm seeing the skew to the wide receivers even more extreme by age. The older, the more extreme. And the younger running backs are really ruling the day over the younger wide receivers. Okay, they're dominating them. Okay, so I'm looking for more of a seasoned wide receivers here. Preferably what? 24 to 30 in there. Maybe even some of the old dogs are producing. If they're really good, they're producing some of the pretty good numbers. Well, I think that's how I'm interpreting that. Love this data, by the way. Here's the area. I think it's showing the skew towards the wide receiver because that's up at the top. Here's the old versus the young. Notice the young running back. Okay, they're owning this segment really nice. Look at the purples here, 20 to 30. Okay, and notice the running backs here, not a lot of purple and green, a lot of red, a lot more red for running backs, a lot of green. So you can see the shift in age. Almost no green at all here for running backs, 31 years old. So the wide receivers are definitely producing later, certainly later in the draft. So I think it's an area that is showing that trend here. So, I mean, this is just a way to quickly look at that, but we've kind of talked about that. It's good stuff. I'm staring at this a little more. You're saying, what do I do with my metrics? Well, I'll sit back, drink some coffee, and think about it. What does that mean? What am I missing? What is it telling me? Okay. And sometimes it's not instant, right? It's not like pouring water and it all pops out. You need to put some time in. Yeah, well, I don't have time for that. That's good. The winners of the league have time, and you'll be out of the playoffs, and they'll be collecting your money. So how you want to play it? Okay, I just want to have fun. That means I want to lose and I don't care. I'm hard life. If we look at experience and we look at the flip-flops here, it's a lot more data to go through. And the dominance here, and I'll just say the top experience. Running backs rule the show to about the fourth year, where wide receivers, I mean, there are some running backs come back 6, 7, 8, then wide receivers certainly by 9. So a seasoned wide receiver that has top potential should not be ignored. I think that's what it's telling us. Okay, and I think there's a late dominance for wide receivers throughout. And I think if you look across, if you look at these averages here, okay, here's running backs, wide receiver, and this is just across all the rankings. It is clear that wide receivers are dominating across all experience levels, from 1 to 84, of course. And you could see that trend as well. So I think the youth cannot be ignored in running backs, and age has to be ignored with the wide receivers. I think we can live with that. You can take a look at that data if you want. This is me looking down, looking at the red are the running backs and the green are the wide receivers, and look at the dominant. Where's the positional dominance here? Look at experience, 11 years in the league. It's all green except for 1. 10 years experience, green versus red. 9-year, green, red. Starting to be close to equal, 8-year, 7-year, 6-year, 5th, so there's a flip-flop there, 5th year, 6th year, 4th year. Looks to me 3rd year, 2nd year, rookie, the top groups here tend to be the running backs here, ranking 1st through the 48th. So I couldn't go all the way down, but clear that in the top slots with youth, okay, tends to be running backs, even to 8 years. Okay, the top 2 or 3 slots. But certainly by 9, it's all running backs. Okay, big difference, big shift. Looks like there's some shifting here in some of these slots here, so I'm not sure it's as clean, the data. I think it's clear on the barbell ends of the youth versus the age. It's completely flip-flop there, which is intriguing. And so I think if you look at the average fantasy points in the top sectors, and we look at the age here, and we can kind of see what's producing experience. I like that. So if you're young and you've had 3 years experience, so if I'm 23 with 3 years experience, I'm top. And then if I'm 24, 4 years experience, notice you can still 5 and 6, you're really peaking. So the peak here is having 5 or 6 year experience, being below 26. With running backs, notice you start decaying, declining, and you really declined here. So for dynasty players, I think 27 becomes a hot potato. You don't want to hang too late here. Notice the trend is a little bit more seasoned wide receivers are doing pretty good. Okay, notice the youth here. you're an old wide receiver, but 3 years experience, or a rookie. So I think wide receivers need a little bit more experience than maybe running backs. I guess there's more finesse in the position, maybe. Again, this is on average. Okay, you can take a look at the points here, and you can see 6 years experience is the top. 7 years experience is the top here. So wide receivers are seasoned. They get an extra year out of them for sure. And then I would jettison them by 7 years. Yeah, you need to, and 8 years here. So I think I would use this if I was, and again, this is the top 25%. So these are the elite. Okay. These are the ones that are going to make or break your league. Okay. So don't hang on to them too long. Okay. I know it's hard to get rid. The sunk cost fallacy, right? I invested all this time. Why should I get rid of them? I may be wrong. Look, I'm not a master in dynasty by any means, so I don't know the answer. I'm just telling you I could understand the feeling that if you drafted a wide receiver, it would be hard to say, well, on average, they're 7 years in, I need to get rid of them, or 6 years in, this is their last good year. That'd be tough. So good luck if you're a dynasty player like that. Okay. I think that is end of part 1 here. Oh, okay. So this is me graphing these areas here, comparing them, looking at those segments, kind of seeing that area here of the age, the experience versus age here. Pretty much what we just covered. This is just a graph showing the different ones here, and clear the rookies, running backs are doing better than the rookie wide receivers. So I guess if I was dynasty, if a second year wide receiver coming in should be improving. I mean, the running backs are improving too, but you might catch some people sleeping there. Of course, everybody kind of knows that. And third year in, you're not probably getting as much as you think, whereas extremely young running backs, take a look at this, almost linear here. It's really kicking up a notch even more. People may not realize how that is. 21, 22, 23. Look at that trajectory. That is very intriguing. If I was dynasty, I'd really be thinking about that. So a third year running back that's still 23 years old. I mean, I would definitely key those out in your draft sheets. Find out, the experience and the age, and then, you can come back to this and kind of, sift out some winners for you. Notice that what you get with the wide receivers really doesn't, kind of almost plateaued after 2 years here, and it might jump a little bit if you started out fairly young, 24, 25, 26, you might get a little bit, and if you're definitely seasoned, like I said, you're getting linear to about maybe the 7th year, and then you're crashing. So 6 or 7, don't hang on too long. And I think for running backs, I'm not sure you're getting a lot of oomph after the 3rd year. I'm not sure there is, 4th year or 5th year. I think running backs, you're pretty much peaked by 3 or 4 years experience, whereas running wide receivers, you're getting 4 or 5 years, maybe 6 years experience. You're getting a lot more to it. So I would think about it. Again, this is just on average. Okay, I have said more than I probably wanted to say here. And I know you're probably already shut down. Feel free to stop, go chill, come back and rewind, think about, go through this and think about it over and over. Okay, this is Dr. Bush. This has been the process. It's not flashy or sizzly. It's a slog, but it's through the metrics and it's real. And the data is as the data is, and I'm sorry if it doesn't fit to what you think is real. The numbers are real. Now, your analysis may not be real, but the numbers are the numbers. Okay, this is a process. Dr. John Bush, please come back if I hadn't run you off. Okay, next time.